So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for RATV, an exclusive interview, as Dean Willow-Bay said. I first want to start off by saying congratulations for getting the Selden Ring Award of 2026. How do you guys feel about that?
It's an enormous thrill. To have this recognition for our work, it was a challenging story and a very important story. We feel that we shed light on something that people really need to know about, and to have recognition from such a incredibly important foundation and this school it's tremendously exciting. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say, as journalists, there's a sort of satisfaction we feel when a story comes together, right? Especially for investigative pieces that take years. You started this in 2023 to now. So, however, the other side of that is uncovering and experiencing something very tragic, and I wanted to ask, how does one balance that feeling of satisfaction, but also, seeing that tragedy firsthand? Like, is there an element of connections or even responsibility you feel for those affected communities?
For sure, until this day, all of us are still in touch with many of the people who we spoke to in Nigeria. Not just spoke to, but as you said, this is a long-term process. So there are people in Ogijo who now we have known for more than a year. Right. We exchange happy Easter greetings, we ask how their kids are doing at school, and that's one of the powerful things about investigative reporting is you're embedded in the subject matter, and yes, you're satisfied when a story is finally published because you work so hard on it, but you also want to make sure that the thing that you've written about, which is so important, can be taken as far as possible in terms of results, impact, and outcome.
Absolutely.
And I would say also that responsibility was very much present during our reporting in Ogijo, and working with you two in how we were cultivating those relationships in the community, and taking care of sharing those folks' stories, and making sure that was clear and present as well.
Absolutely. And my second question is, global health communication has been a rising topic in Africa, just period, when it comes to HIV and AIDS and COVID-19. So there's also a constant stream of misinformation that comes with that as well. So we have an initiative here at USC, like the U.S. Africa Initiative, that talks about, that's a fellowship that talks about bridging that gap between misinformation and, accurate information and kind of fixing that problem. So I wanted to ask, when you completed this story and sent the translated copies to Nigerian media, do you believe that the people fully understand the significance of your findings?
It's something we thought long and hard about because lead poisoning is called the invisible illness. So unlike so many other public health crises, it's not something that you see. We didn't see lead poisoning when we went to Ogijo, and most people there, even if they were ill, didn't know what was wrong with them, which is one reason why the novelty of what we did in this investigation, working with scientists to get actual tests of blood, air, and soil, was so important. Because then we could go to the authorities and put in our story, here are the details, here is the data. And I think that's why we saw the impact that we did, in part, because even the most cynical government couldn't deny that a child had a blood poisoning level of almost 30, for example. But we also knew that it wasn't enough just to put information out there, right? That there was a whole education campaign that we could help be a part of by translating the story into local languages, by working with local radios to disseminate the story.
Right, and on the dissemination part, we did take a lot of time also to understand how the community accesses information. And so we did a lot of planning and took a lot of care into creating WhatsApp community groups. So that's one of the main forms of communication, as well as paring down some of our content just for those channels. And then also, shorter video clips for TikTok and for Instagram, and working, like Will said, with radio.
This was a thing that we really thought about and debated internally long and hard, because this is a community where people understand something's wrong, right? They can smell the air, they can see the smoke, they know that they're not feeling well, children are suffering. This is not a mystery to anybody in this community, but the sort of clear binary answers to questions. We're not doctors, we're not scientists. To Will's point, we're very much relying on data so that we're taking away any sense of conjecture. But in terms of dealing with the regular people living in this community, we felt a firm commitment to not overpromise, to not be like the latest outsiders parachuting in from far away, promising to fix problems we're in no position to fix, while giving them what certainty was available to them about the situation in their community.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask, was it difficult finding people to survey and participate in those blood tests? Was that any difficult at all? Was it difficult at all?
It was a challenge, and one that surprised us, I think, the first time we went out to Ogijo. We've all reported overseas before, but this was like, how do you approach someone and tell them that they might be suffering from a very serious illness or that their child might be sick, as a journalist and not as a medical professional? So there certainly was reluctance among some people to speak to us at first, but I would also point out that this wasn't somewhere where we went for 2 days, flew back to the United States, and that was it, right? I was in Nigeria 4 times last year. Peter was there 2 or 3 times, right. Taylor as well. So these were relationships that we built up over time, and we also worked with a number of Nigerians who have experience in the subject matter as well. And I think that's really important for people listening and watching and thinking about this kind of investigation. We were very conscious of the ethics and the sensitivities that needed to be paid attention to throughout this whole investigation when interacting with everyone.
You also mentioned, governments and their kind of role in this topic. So it seems like when it comes to big corporations and governments in general, there's a tendency to kind of prioritize business over quality of life sometimes. And we can also infer that from in your article, there was a lack of response from several companies and several organizations. So what do you hope that these businesses and governments will take away from your findings, and do you believe true change will happen following this?
Anytime you dive into an international supply chain, there tends to be a similar structure. Like, the closer you get to the place where the metal is being produced, the product is being produced, the greater the moral culpability, because it's, the trading company that's actually going to these plants and buying this lead, they absolutely are aware, and we documented this in the story. They're aware of the conditions, they're aware of the risks, and they're actually earning a profit by minimizing that to their customer, assuring their customer who's further and further away that we've taken care of all the social environmental issues, not to worry, you can pay us in good conscience. I think our objective in terms of that dimension is to force the companies that are on the buying end of the material from these trading companies to reckon with their own culpability and to work harder, to not simply check a box and take an assurance that all is good here, but to really think hard about, what do you know about the conditions in which the stuff you're buying is produced, and to own some of that. And that applies, beyond Nigeria, beyond lead. That applies to a whole number of international supply chains.
Absolutely. And I wanted to make a more general question. Well, we see some of the results from the poisonous lead trade have been, the African government has responded, or the Nigerian government has responded, and some companies have, looked more into where their lead is coming from, or the recycled lead is coming from, rather. So I wanted to ask you 3, how would you explain the necessity of investigative journalism when it comes to making change in the world, either using, results from the poisonous lead trade or your individual works? I know that was a big question. Take a minute.
I wanted to think on that.
I think it's about telling people about things that they don't even know they don't know. The highest level investigative reporting takes the audience, I was going to say reader, but that's antiquated, takes the audience to a place they weren't even thinking about, to examine a problem that had never even entered their consciousness, and then force society, consumers, government, advocacy groups to reckon with the real risks that are there for affected communities, like the people we met in Ogijo, who, again, are representative of literally hundreds of millions of people around the world who, in a whole range of industries, are paying the costs of the cheap stuff that we rely on in wealthy countries like the United States.
I would say one thing that is, I think, a through line from what you said, Peter, is the connection. Even if you're not directly on the ground, the community that's being impacted, how does this relate to you? And I think that that's one thing when it comes to investigative reporting, or just reporting in general, is us drawing the connection of how you might be impacted here in the U.S., how someone else may be impacted in Europe, and creating that sense of community, but also doing that by centering stories of those that are involved.
And then my last question is, since the publishing of your piece, has there been any major updates, or do you plan to continue following this topic at all?
So we're definitely following up what's happening in Nigeria. Since the publication of the story, the government has concluded the largest ever environmental testing of anywhere in Nigeria related to battery recycling. About 500 people had their blood tested in response to our reporting, so that the government can get a better sense of the scale of the contamination and the poisoning. Those results aren't out yet, but part of our job is to follow up on that. And then we're also acutely aware of the fact that Ogijo was one community. And as we found in the story, as the United States has less and less of its own recycled lead, as more consumers need car batteries with lead in it, the story that we uncovered here is popping up in other different places. Now, I like to think that because of our investigation, more players involved in this space will be aware of the problems. So the battery company, the trading company, will no longer be able to say, like they could have 12 months ago, we didn't know that lead recycling in Africa was a problem. We've documented that. There is no way in which they can avoid being aware of that question. But it's the kind of thing that we will stay on top of.
Absolutely. And is there anything I didn't ask you here that you would like to say or mention?
I mean, the part of this story that will stay with me forever is just, as a dad, seeing these children playing in the sand, right next to factories that are spewing out poison, with no recourse for these families. I mean, they can't easily move away. They don't have a say over what's happening. And as a dad, lucky enough to be in a wealthy country, knowing that it's hard enough to keep, my 6-year-old out of danger with toys and a backyard, my heart just goes out to people, and I just feel a real sense of responsibility to use whatever I've got, and for us to use what we've got to shine light on this reality for people in this community, so that we can take ownership of the implications of our own consumption and the structure of our own supply chain.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add that, one of the things I believe is that journalism is a tool for discussion and difference. And that was made possible here by people in the community that shared their stories with us. And so I'm grateful for that access, that vulnerability, that intimacy of those folks sharing their stories. And hopefully, we were able to make some difference and continue to do so.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you three again for your hard work and on this topic and shining light on this topic, like you mentioned. And yeah, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much
Thank
for your
you.
attention.
Thank you.